Hey, you guys. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And hey, tell us where you are. Leave a comment. We've got people from everywhere. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Jared. That doesn't count. But he is
Oh, I don't
from,
count.
yeah, you do. He's from the Midwest, but I'd love to hear from all you guys. And there's the other Jared. Wow, look at that. Double Jareds. Just bam, ba bam. We have our favorite guest coming up here in a minute.
Wherever
Dan.
you are in the world. And hey,
Whoa,
Sorry.
what's going on there? And there's Amy
I think
and
that was
Tim.
Dan Echo.
And there's Jared again. So awesome, you guys. We're going to have some fun here, as always, in a minute. Yeah, we've been chatting about all sorts of stuff behind the scenes here. There's a lot going on in the world, and we like to talk about it. Zurich, hey, listen, I don't remember seeing you here before. Sue, okay, Sue in Zurich. And Brian, hello.
Yeah, Sue in Zurich. My niece is about to fly from Texas to Zurich to compete in the World Acro Championships. She got selected as part of the U.S. team, and she's on her way to Zurich, which is where my mom's family comes from, Switzerland. So I think we're related.
I love Switzerland. I love Switzerland. There's Hans. I hope you're doing better, Hans. He had a little bit of an injury. You know, Dan, you'd really appreciate what he's doing. That's his project. He's showing us, he's documenting his mega running. I don't remember what you call it exactly, but we're talking about 100-mile runs, ultra runs. And he's documenting it through the mountains. It's absolutely amazing.
Well, Hans, the closest I came is last year I did a 30K down on the Texas-Mexico border.
30K.
And I'm a cyclist. I'm not really a runner. And my brother is a runner. He does Ironmans, and he convinced me that this was something I should do. And about 5 miles into the run, I was like, what did I get myself into? All I'm trying to do is not die on the border. And so, yeah, I finished, but I was in pain. For the last 5 miles were awful.
30 kilometers. That's
30 kilometers with no. How much training did I do? Zero.
Zippity doo dah. Wow. Well, why don't we get this party officially started here? So, okay, you guys, you know who I am, right? Marc Silber, author, photographer in Carmel, California.
Outward Bound instructor.
Outward Bound instructor. Yeah, a few things. I got a couple of things under my belt. And a friend of Bay Photo, because these guys make prints, and I want you guys to have prints on your wall. This exposer, those are really cool. They float off the wall. This is an exposer here. And you can, Bob Holmes talked about it. You can make a print of almost any size, and it floats, which is pretty cool. So those are 30% off. I would grab one of those because those are pretty neat. And then you've got canvas wraps. You know, listen, they print obviously everything. These are just some of their things. I mean, these are maybe non-traditional, but acrylic prints, you can get any kind of print, and you can get 25% off on your first order. So the deal is this. Our mantra is make prints. Get your stuff off your computer, put it on the wall, put it in a book, put it in something physical, because that's what photography is all about. All right. Well, listen, you guys, without further ado, you already know who he is. But if you don't know who he is,
make sure they subscribe too.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Jared. He always has to remind me to tell you guys to subscribe and enable the bell so you don't miss any of our shows. Thank you, Jared. And Dan, welcome back to the show. And AG23, our topic, Jared, today is what? Tell us what we're talking about so us old guys can remember.
We're talking about storytelling and mistakes that you should be avoiding as a photographer.
Storytelling and mistakes that you should avoid. And Dan, let's start with the AG23. What do you got there?
Wait, I have two confessions.
Uh-oh.
Two confessions up front.
I'm going to hear your confession, my son. What do we got here?
There's been a tremor in the force.
What camera are we using here?
as you know, I'm a Fuji. Basically, I've been shooting Fuji
Sony.
digital cameras
Oh.
for a long time, and I just got this, which is the A7C. It's the little tiny rangefinder full frame.
That's pretty
Now, I
cool.
bought this for the reason I'm showing you that is I've been on this show many times, and we've talked about one camera, one lens.
Yeah.
And if given my druthers, I would use my Leica M4 and 50 millimeter and a bag of Tri-X for the rest of my life. But that doesn't really my job does not allow me to do that now. So
Yeah.
I use Fuji cameras, and in terms of like ergonomics, I think Fuji is by far the most friendly designed camera you can find, because it feels like all the cameras I was using for the first 30 years of my career, the old film cameras, where the dials are all in the right places. But so much of what I have to do now is motion based, and autofocus for motion content in particular, the Sonys are unbelievable. So I have a little ZV-1 vlogging camera that I've had for about 6 months now, and it's so good. And once I started using it, I never touched the Fujis for motion anymore, because the autofocus was better and the camera was much, much smaller. And so I saw Sony had this camera, and I thought, I got to try this. And I made 3 films with this camera yesterday alone, and there's just not a second of the footage that's not sharp.
Wow.
And
Cool.
I was like, and plus, I got 1.8 lenses that are very light, relatively small. I'm actually stoked. It's the first, those are the first new cameras I've had in a long time that I'm like, wow, these are actually working for me.
Wait a minute. I just have to ask him. Can you? Yeah. I'm not sure who I'm talking to. Could you ask Dan Milnor to come on the show? That's who we
exactly.
were. This gearhead guy. I don't actually know. You look like him, but I'm sure he's standing out right outside. Would you just tell him to come?
But I draw the line in talking about things like bokeh. If I ever talk about something like bokeh, then just turn this off.
Then we know this is the wrong guy entirely.
Send help.
We know that Martians have landed and they put a fake, Dan Milnor in the screen.
It's a weird thing when you work for a brand and you do your own stuff and you work with a bunch of other creatives and you collaborate. It is incredible the amount of stuff that you can end up utilizing. Back when I was just doing documentary work, the Leica and a 50 and a bag of Tri-X was great. It just did everything I needed. But I was showing Jared earlier, I released a film yesterday on YouTube, Notes on Photography, where I showed a still image, but then I showed all the images that built up to that image. And I showed the Polaroids that led up to that image. And I also played sound from the scene, what it sounded like to be there to make it. Huh. And so, I had to have my audio recorder, I had a Polaroid camera, I had my Leica, I had all that stuff in the field. And at the time, you're like, oh, this is too much stuff. But if you want to do that kind of production, you have to have it. And so it's a weird mix of like, trying to find the balance. But yeah, I'm officially now a complete and total hypocrite.
You are. We've confirmed it. And what was your second confession? Didn't you say you had 2 of these?
Well, the second confession is this, but I'm going to hold off on it for a second because we're talking about telling stories, right? We're talking about making pictures and telling stories. And I've got a little bit of advice here. 4 things up front. 4 pieces of like positive advice. 6 things to avoid doing, mistakes. And then I'll show you AG23 because there has been an interesting development.
Okay.
In a good way.
Good.
So for God knows what reason, from the moment I picked up a camera, I only wanted to work in story form. I didn't wander around and shoot random photos. I was never that good at it. And I was always, even if I was trying to wander around and shoot random photos, I would shoot one and then it would make me think of a story that was related to that one picture. And then I would go down the rabbit hole of that story. And I'm still doing that. Everything I do now if I'm working by myself on a project of my own, it's always a narrative.
Yeah.
And there are 2 things that when you're doing that kind of work, and what's very cool about doing programs like yours, Mark, and talking to like people, prosumers, pros, consumer photographers, there's a lot of people who want to do projects, but they're kind of unsure of how to get started. They don't want to make mistakes, all of that stuff. But there's 2 things, I think there's 2 ingredients you cannot substitute for, and that is time and access. Mm-hmm. The more time you have and the more access you have, the better your photographs will be. And there is no shortcut. There is no 2 ways around it. You have to get as much time as you can possibly get, and you have to get access.
Right.
And those two things for most of us are challenging because we have jobs, we have families, responsibilities, and access now is harder to get than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so, you really have to do your homework. So advice is spend as much time as possible, get the best access you can. I think when it comes to getting something like access or permission, you better have an elevator pitch for what you're doing.
True that.
Now, step one is elevator pitch. So when someone says to you, what are you doing? You don't fumble. You have a short, concise, clear directive as to why you are there making pictures. You're not an Instagrammer. You're not a tourist. You're not a looky-loo. I'm here doing a project. This is what photography is. This is how I'm doing it. Great. The second part of that is you should have a printed field guide, something small that goes in your bag that proves the kind of work that you're doing. Do not show someone something on your phone. Do not do it.
Right.
Because no matter who you are, you show on your phone, it reduces you to an Instagrammer, a looky-loo. It just trivializes everything you're doing. When you hand a printed piece to someone in the field, they will stop what they're doing and they will look at it. They will give it undivided attention, and that's what you need to get the kind of access you're after.
Boom.
Point number 2 is there is a big difference between doing projects that are about inanimate objects as opposed to doing projects about people. A lot of photographers now, especially in the online space, they only shoot inanimate objects. They shoot houses at night. They shoot old buildings. They shoot urban abstract landscapes. There's no engagement with people at all, because when you engage with people, you are increasing your degree of difficulty exponentially. It is much, much trickier photographing people. So if you haven't done it, if you're a landscape photographer, great. Go do a project about people, because it will teach you so much about photography. It teaches you to work very quickly. It teaches you to read a scene just based on the feelings that you're getting from the people around you. You will know immediately whether or not it's okay to photograph or not based on the vibe of the scene that you're in. It forces you to engage with strangers. It forces you to explain yourself. It is such a wonderful experience. Even if you don't do anything with those photographs and you go right back to being a landscape photographer, I think the education that you get from photographing a story that's people-based is invaluable for understanding photography in general. And for whatever reason, I only do people-based stories. And it's made my life miserable at times, but it's also been one of the most rewarding aspects of being a photographer.
Dan, I found more and more, I'm only interested in a photograph if there's a person in it. And I think naturally that's, okay, rocks, we can have, right, there's a certain aesthetic appeal there, but when you put a person into the photograph, and that's the other side of that, is you could be a landscape photographer and include people as well.
Yeah.
If you want to just get
sure.
Right. But it adds an element, a completely different element.
Urban landscapes are a genre all to themselves, and some of the most famous photographers of all time work in that genre of urban landscapes, urban abstract landscapes with people. What I see now is a lot of young photographers, a lot of online photographers that, they're playing the game of trying to build a following. And so the projects they do are often projects that they can do very, very quickly so that they can spend the bulk of their time promoting the project. And when you do a people-based project, it's like working in molasses. I was with a guy last night, a photographer, very accomplished guy here in Santa Fe. He's got 7 books to his name. He's making his first film, and he's been working on it for 5 years. And, we screened about an hour of the film at my house last night, and he was trying to get feedback. And you realize, he's been working on this for 5 years, and he's a long way away from finishing this film. And I think a lot of people, especially younger photographers, hear that and they go, well, I don't want to take that much time. I want to get famous now. Right. And so what do I have to do? And so that's why you see so much conformity, and you see a lot of like that, what I would call detached work, because you can do it quickly and then spend the rest of your time promoting it. Yeah. And so I think, there's nothing wrong with landscape, urban abstract landscape, shooting old buildings, doing that stuff. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I think testing the water and doing a project, like if you're an old building photographer, find the person who designed the building and go photograph them, do an official portrait. and see what happens. It's a great education. Point
I'm
number
with you on
3.
that.
Whoops. Point number 3.
There we go.
When you're telling a story in the field with photography, you're not making a portfolio. You're making a book. And there's a big difference. The book has a narrative. So if you go in the field and you shoot 10 buildings and you go, these are my 10 best buildings, that may or may not tell a story. So when you start to do projects and stories, you have to photograph differently. And you have to photograph things that are educational images, transitional images. They're images that link aspects of the story. They link chapter to chapter, but they may not be aesthetically beautiful. So all of a sudden you're designing your book or your magazine and you're like, oh, these are my 10 best images, but they don't tell a story at all. I've got to add in all these other things and I've got to use those 10 best images as the backbone, but I have to include all these others. Otherwise the viewer is going to be like, what's going on here? I don't understand this story. I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a bunch of, 10 great photographs, but like, what's the point? Yeah. So it's amazing. It teaches you to look at things in a very, very different way and to photograph stuff that you would probably walk right by. If you were just shooting for your portfolio, you'd be like, well, I don't need that. But man, and here's the really, really fun part is when it comes time to design the publication, you get to sequence all those. And there's nothing more challenging than taking like 20 portfolio images, the 20 best images from a project, and then layer in all of the transitional educational images that help tell the story into one narrative. That's the forgotten child of book publishing is the sequencing aspect. And that's the power of sequencing is like a roller coaster ride. Those 20 images are bringing people up and shocking them and bringing them down and bringing them back up. And all the rest of it is filler.
Boom. While you're taking a little breather there, will you guys hit the like button because it actually helps let other people know what we're doing. If you like what Dan is talking about, please like it.
Hit that like button, people.
Hit that like button. Okay. People like it. Like to hear the like button.
The last bit of positivity advice here is to settle on your technique at the beginning of the project, and don't ever think about it again. If you're in the middle of a project and you're still changing gear and changing lenses and changing technique, you might as well start over. Because what people want at the highest levels of photography, whether it's a photo editor, an art buyer, an agent, a gallery, a curator, a collector, a book publisher, they are looking for cohesive work. They're looking for cohesion all the way through a project, start to finish, one consistent, cohesive look. I do not see books ever published by people who are changing techniques. That doesn't work. So whatever it is, if you want to shoot 8x10 field camera and you want to shoot transparency film, great. Commit to it on day one and don't stop until the project is over. Then when you do another project, reassess what technique works the best. I gave a talk yesterday and I showed a project that didn't work, a project that I did that I got halfway through and I was like, this sucks. My work sucks. And I have to start over. And this was something that I traveled to 5 different states. I drove all over the country and I knew immediately that it was not good enough. And so for some unknown reason, I tried to shoot it with a Pentax 645 because I thought that was a really cool camera. And, the first stop of the project, I was like, this is the wrong camera. Why am I doing this? And I did it anyway. And I did 4 more stops until I finally got to the point where I was like, this work sucks. And I have to start over because I used the wrong kit because I fell in love with this camera thinking it would work and it didn't. So whatever it is, whatever technique you want to use is fine. Just choose it and forget about it.
Boom. Well, thank you, Dan.
Pete, now we're moving on to the mistakes that you want to try to avoid, the pesky mistakes.
And by the way, if you guys have questions or comments, throw them in there. We can take them up as we go.
That's so funny. I was just saying the same thing. If you have questions, make sure it goes into the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, the first one, and I think you can put this together from what I've already said, is if you're going to do a project, tell a story, don't rush it. Don't rush. Just take your time. Just choose something that's local, that's close, that you can access all the time, and just take your time. Even when you come home, it's okay not to edit those pictures right away. It's okay to download them, back them up, and just leave them alone for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even, I leave stuff sometimes for several years at a time before I really go back to it and make an edit. And it's incredible what you will miss the first time through your edit. So just don't rush. I think that's a really good, photography. It's gotten a lot faster in the last 20 years with the advent of digital, which is both a good thing and a challenging thing. So just take your time.
Dan, that's such a good point. We've talked about it too. Ed Koshy said you've got to spend enough time to let the magic unfold. And it isn't a hit and run type thing. And that's part of the problem with this Insta, mentality is it should be like that, but it doesn't always work that way, right? You have to let it unfold. And you have to let the scene do what it's going to do, which may not happen in 1 minute. It might happen in an hour. It might happen in a day.
Point number 2, you should share every single thing you're doing in real time. Just kidding.
Wait a minute. Get that guy out of here.
Yeah, that if I had actually said that for real, then you would have known that it's not me.
That
With
was
a new
it.
Camera and telling you to share your work in real time. You don't want to share your work in real time. You don't, especially if you are doing a project or a story, do not under any circumstances put this on Instagram, because all you're doing is undermining your entire project. You are undermining the relevance and the power and everything else, no matter who tells you to do this, because the vast majority of people in the photo industry will tell you to do that. They all have ulterior motives for telling you that. They have no interest in how good your project is or if your project is successful. They are making their own lives very, very easy, and they're playing in a system that they've all been sort of brainwashed into thinking is what they have to do. It's completely misguided, and you don't want to do it. So just take your time. If you have a confidant or you have a mentor or you have a group, for example, last night at my house, it was myself, my wife, a photographer who's also an instructor, the director of a workshop program, and a photographer filmmaker. And the photographer filmmaker came over to show us 4 a little sneak peek because he wanted our feedback. And he's known us all for 20 years. He trusts us. We all gave him completely different feedback, and that's what he needed and wanted. He didn't put it on Instagram and say, can I get feedback? Because that's the worst thing he could have possibly done. Not to mention, if you show too much of a story, then the audience says, I've already seen it. I'm not interested. I don't want to buy the book. I don't want to read this. I don't want to follow along. So you have to be very, very careful what you share, how you share it. So that's point number 2.
Let me bring something up here. We have a class called AYP Plus, and that's what we're doing. Amongst this group, it is a safe group to show the project as it's developing, but that's a very different kind of thing than you're talking about. It's not going out to the broad world. This is a trusted inside group. By the way, Jared, put the link up there because you guys who want to be part of that should be in that group. This whole summer we're doing projects.
70% of the traffic on social are bots. So you're not even getting humans. Twitter is particularly bad, where a huge percentage of that stuff, it's just bots. And so, I see these photographers putting stuff on Twitter, and I'm like, you're just going backwards in terms of relevance. Because the other thing is, and this is I'm going to give you another little hard truth here. Nobody cares what you're doing all day, every day. Like if Marc had tuna for lunch, I don't care. I love Marc. I love Marc. I don't need to know what he ate for lunch, right? I don't care. So people will tell you, oh, it's great. I love that. It's not. But behind your back, they'd say, why is he posting all that stuff?
Yeah.
So you speak when you have something to say, and otherwise just go work. Just go work and make the best pictures you possibly can. And then when you have something to say, when the whole thing is done, the perfect example for me when I was coming up as a photographer was Sebastião Salgado.
Yeah.
We didn't have social media, we didn't have phones, we didn't have the internet, and Salgado would pop up every few years, and he would pop up with something that everyone else just went, holy cow, you got to be kidding! This is the project's done on a scale that nobody else was doing. that's the kind of thing that I think is still relevant today, much more so than post. It's just like,
Yeah.
I literally don't follow, of all my like hero photographers, I don't follow anybody online.
Yeah.
I don't follow. Okay. Point number 3. I mentioned this before. A lot of people get obsessed over the technical approach to a project, and they cannot get beyond it. And the only people who care about a technical approach are other technical photographers, not even aesthetic photographers who are enamored by aesthetics. And here's another little, maybe a little window into the realities of the photo world that it may surprise you. A lot of the legendary photographers that I've met, not a lot, I would say more than you would imagine, of the most successful sort of legendary photographers I've ever met, had almost no technical ability whatsoever. In fact, some of them did not even know how to set their cameras and lights up. It was all done for them. But what they had was the vision to make the pictures that they knew they wanted. That was the key. And so, I don't know a really successful, good, high-end photographer who's obsessed over equipment. We don't have those conversations and talks. When they show up, we talk about process. We talk about museums and galleries and curators and collections and other work that we've seen that's really impressive. Nobody talks about kit. It just immediately sort of identifies you as a consumer photographer level. And so if that's fine, if kit's what's driving you, then by all means go for it, because there's a huge audience for that. But if you want to make pictures, it's really not part of the conversation once you explain why you chose what you did.
Dan, it's true in almost any field, like in surfing or climbing, for instance. What do good surfers talk about? They don't talk about their board. They talk about the conditions, where they surfed, why that wave, that break was amazing or whatever. The board is like, okay, same thing with climbing, as you know. Like, you're not talking about, wow, I got these incredible boots and I'm using these great cams, or, that might be a tiny, tiny portion of the conversation. But just as with photography, the conversation is about the story that you're on, what you found out, what you discovered, your vision, as you said. That it really is what people talk about.
You look at Alex Honnold, who's the famous free climber now, that the film won the Academy Award a couple of years ago, Jimmy Chin film.
Free Solo.
Honnold, Free Solo. Honnold, I saw someone, I can't remember who it was, ask him a question about his shoes. And, he said, look, I use the same kind of shoes all the time. I just have a ton of these pairs, and I have to break them in to get them to a certain level. And then once they're at that level, that's the only thing I use. And if you're talking about an athlete or a creative, and I think in his case, you can apply both of those titles, I think you would not find someone who has a more critical need with a piece of equipment than him, because that's it between him and death, basically, or is the rubber on those La Sportivas or whatever brand he's using. But I found his answer really refreshing, which was, yes, obviously this is a very critical part of the process here, but I use the same thing over and over and over again because I can't change up. If I change up, I risk dying. And so I think with photography, it's the same thing. I just heard that Abbas, the Magnum photographer, died recently. There's a new documentary film out about him. And I met him on the streets of Paris probably 30 years ago. And we had this really nice conversation about his project, which was called Allah Akbar, which was his long time, like 30-year study of the Islam religion. And, he shot the same thing forever. He was shot black, Leica rangefinders with black and white film. And when I talked to him on the street in Paris, we didn't talk about equipment. And I had done a project in the U.S. on Islam, and he had spent like 30 years covering Islam all over the world. And so that's what we spoke about. We didn't talk about, kit, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Point number 4. If you're going to do a project and you're going to put the project out in the world and say, look at what I did, look at my project, you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to the industry, and you owe it to photography in general to do your research. Who else has done that story? How did they do it? When did they do it? What were their conclusions? How does my story complement the stories that have already been done? How does my point of view add context, Does it conflict? Knowing all of those things, because when you put a body of work in front of someone and you haven't done your research, and they know photo history, or they know the projects like yours that have been done before, and they start asking you questions about why have you seen so and so's work? What did you think about that? And you sit there and you go, I don't know, I didn't really look around. It just puts you in a category again of like someone who's not really prepared to do this kind of work for whatever reason. There's quite a few photographers who kind of get very offended by the idea that they would have to do research, because everyone wants to think that they're original, right? We want to think we're really good and we're talented and we're original, and we're going to really, we're going to find something that no one else has done before. I don't really know, outside of the project that I'm working on right now, which is a totally conceptual piece. I don't know if there's a documentary project I've done in my entire life that hasn't already been done by someone else. But I know the projects that I did, I know who was working in those places going way, way, way back. And especially if there was anyone in the modern era who had done a similar project, I knew about it. And I had seen it, and I had factored it in and said, okay, I'm going to build on this. I'm going to add to this conversation. I'm going to put my own spin on it. But I'm also going to reference the fact that I know that this other work is out there. Because when I do portfolio reviews and people walk up with stories and I look at it and say, oh, you did a project on the Uyghurs in China. Do you know David Buteau's project? And they go, huh? Who? Never heard of him. Oh, I didn't look around. I didn't really pay attention. I don't really care what anyone else is doing. I'm like, you're never going to make it. You just will not make it in photography if you're going to do that. So the research is actually the fun. It's really fun, because I guarantee you're going to learn something. And two, you're probably going to get, if you haven't experienced these other creatives who have been there before you, then it's a gold mine, because you're going to learn and see people and work that's going to blow you away. So the research, I've always been kind of mystified by why people wouldn't do research, because man, it's a lot of fun. It also fun. It leads to all kinds of subsequent stories where you may be going down path A to do your project, but during the research you discover something else and it leads you on a right turn. The project changes or adds to another, it creates another project. So it's actually kind of fun. And the best way to do research is just Google. Just start whatever your project is and start there, then end up in the library. And there's all kinds of like research libraries and grant libraries all over the country where you can really dive in. And also just study your photo history as to what people have done.
And then, what those two things will lead you to often, Dan, is the people that you can go talk to, or you can call on the phone, and they are so happy to download to you stuff that you're never going to find anywhere else. And that really is fun. That's super fun.
Especially if you're doing some bizarre, offbeat project, and you find some guy living in the desert who's been, connected, and you call him and go, look, I'm thinking about doing this project, but I'm trying to feel my way around. You're right. People are like, oh, you're kidding. You're going to come do that project? Oh, well, you got to go talk to Billy and come to my house and do this and that. Yeah, that's the beauty of doing doc work, is that it's an onion. When you think you're done, you peel a layer and you're like, oh no, I've got a whole nother offshoot here I got to cover. Okay. Number 5 mistake to avoid: the lazy edit. The lazy edit. And the lazy edit normally comes in this sentence. Hey, Dan, I've been working on my project and I shot 1,000 photographs and I edited that down to 500. Can you choose your favorites? Now, let me translate. That means I overshot, I don't know how to edit, and I want you to do it for me. So editing from 1,000 photographs to 500 is not editing.
Really?
Editing 1,000 photographs to 20, and then identifying the top 10, and then identifying the single best image of the group, that's called editing.
Right.
And editing really comes into play when you're making publications, because all of a sudden you realize, whoa, I got to pay for this. I could do a 240 page magazine and not edit, or I could do a 40 page and really edit and make it impactful. So, that's something. Editing is sort of slipped as a collective skill, I think, in the digital era, because it's a lot harder to edit little tiny digital thumbnails on a laptop screen
Yeah.
After a while, you kind of get brain dead and you say, I'm just going to leave that in. I'll leave it in. And there's no real penalty in the digital space for leaving it in. It's when you go to edit or you go to a portfolio review, you show up with 500 pictures. You're not going to get booted, but the reviewers are going to be texting each other about you behind the scenes saying this guy or this person brought 500 images. Like, I hope you don't get him as somebody you have to review. I've seen that happen over and over again.
Yeah.
So, super tight, no fat, no repeats. If you've got 3 images of the same scene that are all really good, one of them is going to be better than the other 2. So you've got to learn to distinguish and be merciless. It's like the line in Almost Famous, one of my all-time favorite movies, where Lester Bangs looks at the high school kid and
I love that movie.
He says, you can't be friends with these people. You have
That's
to be
right.
merciless. You're
That's
a journalist. Right. You have to be merciless. You can't be friends. And that's the same thing with your photography. You can't be in love with it. You can have a relationship with it, but you can't be in love. You have to be merciless, because less is more.
That is so true in writing, also filmmaking. I mean, you have a scene, you're just absolutely, I can't get rid of it. But then you look at it, it does not fit. It doesn't belong there. It does, or it's just not needed. And less is more. And you do have to be willing to part with those things that you've fallen in love with, because they don't really work.
Yeah. Last night when we were screening the film, the photographer whose work it was just kept saying over and over again, I got to cut this. I got to cut it. I got to cut it.
Yeah.
It was not like, gee, I have to go back and add more footage. It was like, I have to sift and I have to cut and start making some really hard decisions about this, because he has, 5 years of video content. He's got a ton of stuff. And I said to him, the guts are there. Now comes the hard part, which is making sense of it all.
Yeah. We are getting some questions here too, but let's finish your last one.
Let me finish the last one, which leads me to my second disclosure.
Yeah.
The last point is not printing your work. And Mark, you already mentioned this. Printing forces you to apply critical thought to your work in a way the digital space doesn't. And so putting your work into print is absolutely essential. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can go to Kinko's and make a zine. You can use your inkjet printer at home. You can go to the Walgreens and make little 4x6s. It doesn't matter. It's just about putting your work into print. And speaking of print, this is my ongoing zine project that I have talked about many times. This was the first issue, which was very successful, sold out. Cool thing. As of Monday of this week, issue 2 is alive.
Ooh, nice.
And if you go to ag23mag.com, the zines are free. You pay $5 in shipping, ships to you only domestically. And there's a major reason for that. And I did a YouTube film about the launch of the second issue and why we're shipping only domestically, because the shipping industry right now has been absolutely destroyed.
Yes.
This has five contributors. And I'll just give you the table of contents here. We've got Courtney White. We've got Colin Finley, Elena Dorfman, Hannah Kozak, and Jan Buchowski. This was designed by Zoe Sadikirski in Sydney. And it's beautiful. This is an anaglyph 3D cover. So if you have 3D glasses, the front and back cover will pop.
Wow.
And yes, issue 2 is out. And also ag23mag.com has all of the stories that are in the zine are all built out on the website. In addition, several of the contributors have short films. They have additional work that they've added in there. So it's definitely worth taking a look at.
And Jared will stick the link in there. I think that'll help people get there. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun.
Well done, Dan.
By the way,
yeah.
I can't give you the details because it's private, but I got a call from one of the contributors this morning, and based on her feature in AG23, she just had a very, very successful morning,
nice.
which is all I can say. But I was on my bike this morning, and my phone rang, and it was her, and she said, as a direct result of being in the zine, I just had X, Y, and Z happen, and I can't tell you how happy I am. So that was really is our goal. Our goal is to get you to feature and to look at these contributors because we think they're good and we think they deserve your attention.
Brilliant.
And so that's the plan. So anytime that happens, it makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing.
Absolutely. Awesome, Dan. Did we cover everything? Should we dive into
Yes.
some questions? Okay, good. I
Questions.
saw a couple fly by here. What do we got here? Jared, maybe you could help us find
Yeah, I
some of
can help
these.
you out. I saw a really good one, kind of going back to this one's from Brian, and he asked, "What tips do you have for making personal projects for someone who travels a lot? I'd like to get beyond the instant sharing that you're talking about."
There you go. That's a good question, Dan. What do you think? And there it is right on the screen.
All right. So what tips do you have for making personal projects for someone who travels a lot? I'd like to get beyond the instant sharing you're talking about. Yeah. First of all, getting beyond instant sharing is just a load off, right? You can leave your phone in the hotel and not worry about it and just go and observe the world. But one of the tricks that you can do that I think is very helpful, and this ties back into doing your research, is finding a story where you're traveling. So before you go, you do your research and you come up with a story idea. And my advice is to have two story ideas. One is your moonshot story idea, which is best case scenario, everything works out. I get totally lucky. I get the time, I get the access, and I'm able to do that. Great. But also have a fallback project that you can shoot anywhere at any time without access or permission. Because there's nothing worse than traveling and flying halfway around the world and getting over there and realizing your main moonshot project has no chance of happening.
Right.
And then you're dejected and you're frustrated. And now you're like, oh my God, I flew halfway around the world and I'm coming back with nothing. So I had a friend in LA who's a young photography student, a really good photographer and designer. And he did a project once that really kind of got me thinking. And it was a project about covered objects. And believe it or not, in our daily lives, we encounter all kinds of things that are covered for a variety of reasons. It could be a building, a parking meter, a car, a motorcycle, all of these different things. And they're kind of things that we just walk by and we don't pay attention to. But he, for years, had been traveling around the world and he'd been photographing every single covered object that he found. And he had this unbelievable project. And on a personal note, I did a project called Dogs Can't Read, and that was a project that is based on the philosophy that I just explained, which was I was doing a project in Sicily. I'd been going there 5 years in a row working on this project, which I really liked and had been very successful with. But I also needed something that if on those days where something went wrong and I wasn't going to be able to photograph, I would have something to fall back on. And so Dogs Can't Read was about street dogs and graffiti and the partnership of those two things. And I ended up photographing that story in Palermo, New York, Paris, Tijuana, Panama City, Lima. I photographed that project all over the world because it was something I could work on anywhere. And even when I was working on blurb trips where I was completely booked up, when I would walk between locations for my blurb duties, I was shooting that story. So that no matter how little photographic time I got on those trips, I was still able to add to an existing project.
Here's another one, Dan.
Oh, great. Yeah, this is a good one. When do you know you're done with the story and how to get publications interested in the work? So Christopher, that's a really great question. Normally, one of the easiest ways of telling if you're done or not is to print the project, is to either make small prints or put it in a magazine that only you is going to see. And you basically look at it. When you're laying out a publication or laying out prints on the floor and you're studying your project, when you make prints, you will see immediately what you don't have. You'll see the gaps in your project. That's number one. The other thing too is if you have a mentor or you have someone who's an editor that knows photography that can look at your project and tell you you're missing the human element, you're missing a scene setter, you're missing the environment, and they will be able to tell you. Because remember, the world has this group of people, believe it or not, that are called picture editors. And they're full-time picture. That's all they do is edit photographs all day long. And so if you can find one, you may have to pay them to mentor you or pay them to help you edit, but it's invaluable because otherwise your project can just go on and on and on. Or you finish too soon and you've got gaps or holes in the story.
Boom.
Oh, he had a follow-up question, which was how do you get publications interested? Christopher, that's a really tricky question. The editorial market is so damaged and so flawed and so fickle and driven really by advertising. So, you could do the best project in the world, but a magazine looks at it and says, our advertisers don't want this. They're never going to publish it. My advice to you is to publish your own magazine and just start creating a magazine series. Every time you do a project, put your work into print on your own. And then when you meet someone, if you end up meeting with a publication, send them a stack of your own magazine to prove that, one, you can encapsulate an idea, and number two, prove that you have consistently good work. Because a lot of times with a magazine, even if you do a great story, they'll often look at it and say, well, you might have gotten lucky. So can you produce this kind of work over and over again? Because unless we think you can do that, we're not going to work with you. And magazines are fickle. So it's really hard to get doc work published. At least here in the US, it's almost impossible. So do it yourself and enjoy it.
I mean, that's the beauty of our self-publishing tools that we have, like Blurb, and why it is so important to publish no matter what. And you're in control of it.
Yeah. I mean, look, could I get a publisher or a magazine to run these stories? No, they're not interested. These are some of the best photographers working that I've encountered. And one of these is a writer, Courtney White, who's written, I don't know how many books, 4 books about agriculture and regen agriculture in the West. And, magazines are not like running around trying to get these photo essays and stories. They're running celebrity stuff. They're running lists. They're running all the junk that you see. There are still a couple of really good, the New Yorker is a great magazine. The Atlantic, Harper's. New Yorker runs photo essays. They do a really nice job running photo essays. They are far better at running photo essays than the news magazines are.
Yeah.
The news magazines, they look like advertisements now. That's why they're all going out of business.
Okay, here's one other question from Werner. I have a lot to say.
I have a lot to say. With the inability to organize and condense it, I bounce from writing story after story, but never finish any of them. Like my ADHD brain is trying to keep me working forever. So someone very close to me has very severe ADHD, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I think organization of your work is key, especially when it comes to photographs, because one of the reasons I can make so many publications is I have my system and my files organized so that when it comes time to make a publication, I can find them. But at the same time, you might be trying to bite off more than you can chew. You might be trying to do projects that are far bigger than you are capable of. So my advice is to choose something small. You could even start with doing an official portrait of someone where you say, okay, my Uncle Bob is an interesting character. I'm going to call him and ask if I can have an official portrait setting and sitting with him. And you go and you make portraits of Uncle Bob. And while you're with Uncle Bob, you ask Uncle Bob to write you something, like his fondest memory of you as a child, for example. And then in response, you write your favorite memory of Uncle Bob as an uncle. That's it. It's one paragraph.
Right.
You've got one portrait and one paragraph. That's all you're biting off. That is a doable. You can see the borders of that story, your responsibilities, concise, boom, done. And then go do it again and again and again. And then you're going to start building and making your stories a little bit bigger. But just do something digestible that's within your capabilities right now.
Dan, I think on that note, we're going to let you go because I know you got a busy day. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always awesome to have you on the show.
Yeah, anytime. I loved it.
Bring some more gear next time, though. I want more gear in this discussion.
I did get a second lens with this, by the way.
We didn't even get into that. See
and by the way, now that I think about it, it actually came with a kit lens, which I will never use. But so technically, I have 3 new lenses.
I don't know. I still want to talk to the old Dan, but I get it. Things happen.
He's in the other van.
Well, the Martians have abducted the other guy. So, but you're pretty close. It still sounds like Dan. So that's a pretty good deal there. All right, my friend. Thank you so much. Awesome.
Thanks, Jared.
We'll see you again.
Yep.
Don't you guys go away. We got more to talk about. always great to have Dan on the show. I love what we talk about. I love the pace, and I love the fact that it's just real, right? I mean, reality. That last point he made, really, really good. Take that one story, build it, exactly what he said, Uncle Dan or your Uncle Dan or whatever uncle you've got. I did that with my grandmother and just photographed her. And I love that idea of having her or Dan, Uncle Dan, write something, and then you put that in there and you write something back. Very cool, very easy way to start your project. Okay, guys, thank you again. You should be in AYP Plus because all the things he's talking about are what we're developing in our stories. You do need to be around trusted photographers, not just the general world of likes and whatever. But this is, where you can let your hair down and you can show your images and get feedback and hear what other people say. And we're building it into stories. So Jared will put the link in there. Everybody has an Uncle Bob, right? I have a brother-in-law Bob. I don't actually have an Uncle Bob. But Uncle Sambo, that was my uncle. He's the one that gave me this Rolleiflex. He's the one that taught me photography. Uncle Sambo. He was a World War II Top Gun pilot. Rather colorful guy. All right. So what else do we got to talk about? You guys, I love having you guys on the show and joining us. You can join on our next AYP Plus class. That's Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific. Love to see you guys there. You can start your project anytime. You don't have to feel like, wow, you guys are already going. I don't know about my project. You can enter into it and start a new project anytime. We're going to run through the summer with projects and feedback. And I'm telling, I begin each show with a little bit of a class. We talked about Leonardo da Vinci last time because he is an amazing person that you can learn from. I wrote about him in this book here. And then, next Thursday, week from today, our friend Ed Kashi is going to join us. I want you guys to be there. Ed Kashi is an amazing photographer, and he's going to debunk common myths, common misconceptions in photography. So that's Thursday, next Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific live. Please join us. Tell your friends about it. Okay. And meanwhile, remember to subscribe, ring the bell, enable the bell so you don't miss anything. Leave your comments. I love to see your comments. We will respond. Like the video, share with your friends. And last but not least, remember to get out and capture your own images of life. Love you guys. Take care. See you soon.